Jacques, thank you very much for your extraordinary, moving, and deep insights into the tragedy that is happening in Syria. And I witnessed a very beautiful scene last night when we all met, and Hadeel, our other speaker, met you for the very first time and realized that you are the doctor who went inside Syria and helped saving lives. And she kissed you and embraced you and said that she's thankful. And it is those kind of scenes that offer hope at the end of the day, and it is those kind of scenes that show that, of course, you are very courageous in the work that you have done. And it is very difficult now to focus on questions, but I really want to take that opportunity, since we have you here, to go a little bit even more deeper into that topic. And we already have questions from our audience. I would like to start, you mentioned that it is hell what is going on in Syria, and that it is mass murder, and we have to describe it as mass murder. Comparing to other countries that you have seen where war was going on, where severe human rights violations were going on, how different is Syria, and in what way is it uncomparable to other tragedies that you have seen over the decades?
I'll answer in French. Wars are always horrible, but unfortunately, I've been working in the humanitarian field for more than 40 years, and this reminded me of one thing: Chechnya, the repression. It was also a Muslim society. The form of Islam was very open and tolerant. Same size city, more or less. It reminded me of Grozny, above all because of the blind bombing, and it was monstrous. They bombed people, there's snipers, and people are trapped, and there's bombing. There's no goal, there's no point. It's just the population that's being targeted. It's terrible. It reminds me of Grozny and Chechnya.
Jacques, one question that we have from Ohad is, are you concerned that the US and its allies are not doing the same military intervention as they did in Libya? What is your perception of the current situation? And also let me add, from my perspective, would you support a military intervention in Syria?
Well, the opposition and the Syrian resistance, I'd rather call them resistance because that's what it is. They're fighting from within. They're not being invaded by foreigners. They're being martyrized by their own leaders, by their own dictators. But they're resisting and they're withstanding it. But there is a feeling of despair, of isolation. They say, even to the journalists who had the courage to go, those who have paid for it with their lives, some of whom, Edith Bouvier and others, they thank them. They thank the journalists for spreading these pictures because they want people to know about the horror that is taking place there. They want people to hear about it. They want it to spread outside of the country. The leaders are doing everything they can to prevent this. So they're very happy when it happens, and they say it's good that you're thinking about us. That's great, but what is it? How does it help it? It doesn't give us weapons. It doesn't give us food. It doesn't give us medicine. How does that help us? It's terrible. Concerning the West, it's a terrible quandary for the West that I can't resolve. It was the interventions in Iraq and Afghanistan were so terrible with so many deaths. Libya is still a problem. Well, the West, doesn't know what to do, and then I can imagine what would happen with the Islamists. If Qatar and Saudi Arabia gave weapons, then they would join Salafism. If West refuses to help, well, then it's normal. I saw that in Chechnya. In the first war, women were not wearing headscarves. They spoke out, and it was a very pleasant place to be in. Then the Gulf countries helped them, the Chechen, and now they're building mosques, and women have to cover their heads. So this is a warning. Beware of Salafists. But for the time being, there's not one foreign fighter. What I can say is that all the people who have been wounded and I've had to care for were all people that the others knew. There were a lot of volunteers, there were students, but they knew all the volunteers. Oh, that's so-and-so's cousin, that's so-and-so's brother. The brother was killed 2 days ago. There were no foreigners. There were no terrorists. That's propaganda of the government. It's like saying the Al-Qaeda showed up. They prevented the UN from going to Bab el-Ram for 5 days because they had to demine. Well, that's nonsense. There were no mines in Bab el-Ram. They were just carrying out the arrests, and they were trying to purge the place. There was no demining. That's how the regime stays in power.
Jacques, how would you, since we are in Geneva, where the Human Rights Council is of the United Nations is situated, how would you evaluate the entire role of the United Nations, and how would you evaluate the role of Kofi Annan at this moment?
I deeply believe that Kofi Annan is a good man, a very intelligent man, wise, and I have the greatest respect for him. This said, it's almost indecent what's going on, and to have diplomacy hear statements like, I quote, "I'm open to dialogue," insofar as all terrorists have disappeared. In other words, once they've killed everybody who don't agree with them, then they agree to speak to the ones that remain. How we can accept that in diplomatic terms, I don't know. I'm happy not to be a diplomat.
That asked from my perspective, and what you just mentioned in sort of visionary terms, do you see this crisis in Syria solved outside of the United Nations, and how would it be solved?
La réponse à la dernière.
Well, the answer seems very simple. It should be resolved by peace, by Bashar Assad being put in prison. That's how it should be resolved. It's very simple. Now, how to do so, that's more complicated. I don't know. Unfortunately, I'm beginning to think that the crisis, or rather the Syrian tragedy, is making me think of the role played in Spain in 36. Western democracy said, oh, this is very complicated. I don't know if we can really intervene. The fascists, Hitler and Mussolini, had no compunctions about sending bombs and planes to defend Franco. China's sending is sending weapons, and I'm wondering if we aren't reliving the same thing as in 36. That's because I'm old when I refer to 1936.
You're not old at all. You're wise, and it is wonderful to listen to the words that you're saying, and I. Both my heart and my mind are with you when you say that this should be solved through peace. And I have in my article said that maybe to solve the tragedy in Syria peaceful, that moment has maybe passed, but between a military intervention and doing nothing, there is something that is called diplomatic isolation, that is called economic isolation. How do you observe that from your impressions inside of Syria?
Frankly, I don't know. I'm a surgeon. I do war surgery. I don't have a lot of political opinions. I'm against dictators and fascism. But I don't know. What I mean is it's simpler than that. I don't believe in international pressure or embargoes. I was in Baghdad in 2003, and I was the only Western doctor who was there during the whole period that the Americans were bombing, that stayed there with the Iraqi population. And I was shown children who hadn't eaten because of the embargo from the West. The leaders were doing very well. They were fat. These children were like rakes. And so it's the weak who suffer. I don't know.
We have another question from the audience, and what future is there for minorities if the opposition takes over in Syria? Will it be secular or will it be Islamist?
Je sais pas.
I don't know. I'm not very good at prediction. I think the opposition leaders should, and I hope they will, announce clearly that they will protect the minorities, the Christian, Kurd, Syrian minorities that make up Syrian society. This is fundamental to reassure people and create a united Syria one day. This is a basic fact. I hope they do that. Now, what political regime? It has to be their very own. It should be done with transparency, with real elections. Why not? I would like, personally, a more open Western-style democracy. Someone like General Hakim Hashem, if he comes to power, he will most likely create a remarkable democracy. This is beyond my ken.